Hey everyone, it's Friday, May 14th. Welcome to episode 10 of my podcast, Is Breakfast Included? Now today on the podcast, we sit down with singer, songwriter, guitar slinger, family man, and part-time gardener, Mr. Ian Moore. Now back in the 90s, I was somewhat of a club rat. It was very rare that I missed a local show, but whenever Ian came to town, you could guarantee I was right up front and I knew all the words, and I usually bothered him for a guitar pick afterwards. Yeah, I was that guy. Now, I got to ask Ian a couple of questions about early in his career. We talked about songwriting. We talked about him trying to keep his identity in a business where everyone wants you to be what they want you to be. He left no stone unturned. We also talked about life. We talked about mental health, and we talked about Mexican food, which in some way all three of those go together. Anyway, I'll let him tell you all about it. Check it out. All right, well, I guess we'll start out by introducing yourself, man.
I get to introduce myself?
Yeah.
Who am I? Let's see. My name is Ian Moore. I'll start with my name. I do have that. And I guess fundamentally, primarily in this world, I am a musician. I'm also a father, the man of a million hobbies. I'm one of those guys that likes being not good at things, and that's kind of one of my driving forces. So I'm pretty much the person that can kind of have to do almost everything. And I have a couple of skills. I have a couple of kids, live on an island in the country. I think that's a big part of what's going on with me is I love nature. I love being in the quiet. I love meditations of any type. And just trying to kind of live a more present life every day. That's kind of where I'm at.
Right on, man. Kind of like a lot of us right now.
Yep.
Well, my first question, or we'll start off, man. Like I was one of those cats that used to go see you play at the library in Denton, Texas. And
right on.
Yeah. And so around 93, you released your self-title, but you were signed by Phil Walden. Is that correct?
It was.
And you put out your self-titled, then you put out Modern Day Folklore, and then something happened around the third release.
Uh-huh.
What I want to know is that was your third release, but Green Grass came out before that.
Right.
And that came out on your own label. Why is Green Grass not considered the official third release?
Well, I mean, I guess it is the third release. I just, there was a certain trajectory kind of that things were on. And for me, the Green Grass was really kind of eye-opening. And it's interesting now because most artists do this, but at the time, it wasn't really, there weren't a lot of people that showed you the protocol of how to move out of the kind of major label corporate system into a more DIY ecosystem. But what was really cool about that time is that system was just starting to kind of unveil itself. So Green Grass was a bit of an anomaly. Like my manager was literally like, well, this is, you're kind of making like this folky kind of back porchy record. Maybe just make your own label. And I was like, can you do that? I was so in this thing of like major label budgets and kind of like these trying to make these big records, with big producers. And then all of a sudden it was a really liberating experience. And, what I remember about it, and a lot to me, I have a really kind of goofy, strange sense of humor where a lot of the maybe more challenging moments I often find kind of humorous. I mean, not that I don't take the weight of them, but that record was the most Austin-y record I ever made. And the fact that for me, it created so much flack with my fan base and people saying, basically get back to your roots in Austin, when I was like, if you actually lived in Austin and you knew what the vibe was like, you'd be like, get away, get further away from it. Because it was, because in those days when I was coming up, when I think about the really amazing moments, and I'm sure you know this from doing what you do, it's not just on the stage. It's often afterwards when you're sitting around with a bunch of guitars and, or you've had a couple of beers or someone's back porch, someone brings up a banjo whatever the hell happens. Somebody's playing spoons, some dude comes in with a singing saw, you're just screwing around, having fun, doing what you always wanted to do, which is just make joy and make music, and that's what that record is to me.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of my favorite records of yours. The
Oh,
internet was a new thing at the time. So
was.
being a fan and waiting on that third album, you couldn't like just go online and go, oh, when's it going to be released? Has anyone leaked it or anything like
No.
that? So when Green Grass came out, I thought, man, this is so cool. Even though I was a fan of the rock records, like everyone, and I know that you did catch some flack from your fans. In 2000, when All the Colors came out, did you see another like drop off in your fans, and but also gained more fans with that album?
Yeah, I mean, well, and just to put this in perspective, because that was happening even before I put out a record, and that's the interesting thing about, people look, when you're the person in the change, right? When you're the person, people look at your career, and there's always these moments where they go, "This happened, and this is the spot where you did this." But the interesting thing, and I kind of said this in the intro, I'm always changing, and I mean, I don't think that there's anything that unique about me. I do think a lot of artists try to resist it because maybe they're scared. But, the nature of making art is changing. It's just what it is to live, right? Every day is different. You can't go back to yesterday ever. So to me, at every single point, like when I very first came out, my music was very different than even what was on the first record. My early band, when we were playing Black Cat, I wanted to be a blues player because, I was hanging out at Antone's, but I'd come out of kind of the pookabilly, rockabilly scene and all that kind of stuff. My bass player was obsessed with psychedelic music, like early Pink Floyd and real trippy freeform stuff. And my drummer was into like the Cult and the Cure and like kind of 80s kind of new wave, kind of edging into a little bit of punk. So my early band kind of sounded like that, that and the fact that we were young and played everything too fast. By the time I made my first record, which is what a lot of people define as my sound, that was a big change. And I remember a lot of people in the Midwest, where we already had a big following, being kind of disappointed in that record because it wasn't raw enough and it wasn't like edgy enough. It was too polished. So by the time, I got to And All the Colors, I mean, I was 4 or 5 major schisms into my career. So to me at that point, it was just kind of like, some people are going to dig it, some people aren't. And what I really remember about that record, and it's kind of timely because I'm actually going to put it out, is it was it actually did galvanize a big group of new fans. I think some people, it was a lot more kind of modal sounding, a lot more almost Celtic at times. Like I was really getting into a lot of British and Irish folk music. And I think a lot of people that were fans of kind of the more kind of blues rocky thing, they just didn't know how to make the jump immediately. Some people did, some people didn't. And, it's kind of, I don't know how other artists react to this, but it's kind of turned me into like a sociologist because I'm fascinated by what makes somebody follow and then the next person not follow. How do you know what I mean? Like, how do you get something? And why did some fans, dig this stuff and other fans were like, he's a traitor?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I remember just talking. There was a kind of a that was kind of a group of us that used to go see you play all the time. And by the time that album came out, I think you came and did a show here in Denton, and it was like, I'm not going to go see him. Like he's not playing guitar anymore. And
Yeah.
but for what it's worth, I really I really dug those albums. I thought they were really cool. They showed at the time as a young guy, they showed me like, oh, he's progressing. He's not just a guitar slinger,
Yeah.
So
And
and I'm sorry.
well, no, I mean, it's like, I love a lot of different music, but if I'm being really honest, probably, especially early on, a big kind of not just musical force, but kind of like how I wanted to do it was listening to music in kind of the mid to late 60s. And that was always a big inspiration to me of how people transition. How Hendrix transitioned from being a blues player to being this, whatever the hell you'd call that, just everything player.
Yeah.
How the Beatles, from being like a kind of a mediocre American R&B cover band to being the Beatles, how the Kinks evolved, how all of these groups, Arthur Lee and Love, they all went on this just beautiful journey, and they went all over the place. And that always was the template for how I wanted to make music. Was my whole thought from the start was like, well, you better change, you better evolve into something, because who cares if you're still doing the same thing 5 records in? That's just boring.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned earlier around that time of the Colors album, you were getting into like Celtic and Irish music, and that kind of really came out on Luminera, in my opinion. Can you talk about that album a little bit?
Man, I mean, again, I mean, well, it's interesting, and I try to be careful to say this because, again, I think a lot of stuff that I'm pretty off the cuff, and people take stuff. I'm never discounting like I love my first 2 records. I mean, I'm not crazy about the production on the first record, but I'm really proud of it. I love the songs. I still play a lot of them. I really love Modern Day Folklore. I feel like that's when we as a band got our kind of sea legs, and I really can hear the other members of the band more on the second record than I can on the first, which really I feel like they played on it, but it was really kind of, I'd written all the songs kind of by myself at that point. By the time I got to that series of records kind of around Luminaria is in many ways maybe my favorite record for me. And there's a lot of personal reasons for that. One is that the first 3 records that I'd made, because remember, Greengrass again was kind of an offshoot, were made by gigantic producers, and Joe Ciccarelli, Justin Niebank, Mark Howard, Daniel Lanois, like all these guys, like literally the people that to me were demigods. The 4th record was produced by me and engineered largely by me, and so that was terrifying. I remember coming home, Jolene and I, my wife, we had a young baby, and I owed the IRS a lot of money, and my fan base kind of splintering. I was in a really, really rough kind of phase. And it's like I felt almost like I was in like a rock tumbler or something. And barely my consciousness was all over the place. But it was so creative and so valuable. And I just learned how to record. I learned how to produce. I was learning all these different instruments, the songs and the song structures. I was really digging into a lot of different ways of looking at things, in many ways deeper than I'd ever been, but also I had a lot of more contemporary influences in my music. There was a lot of kind of proto kind of indie folk and stuff that a lot of my friends, that's when I met Josh Ritter, I played a couple of shows with Elliott Smith. I was playing shows with Joseph Arthur. There was a lot of different influences that were coming in. I'd put down the electric guitar in many ways. And so it was kind of like rediscovering myself and going, well, without the guitar, who the hell am I? And then on top of that, I have this little kid, and that's blowing my mind. One of my favorite stories from that time period was I remember somebody showed me there was some comment about some guy basically saying that he knew me and that I'd moved to the Northwest and started taking heroin. And the reality of it was that I'd moved to the Northwest and had a kid and really had no time to really even smoke weed or anything. I was probably the most I've ever been in my life. But I was living in this psychedelic world of a baby because I was mixed in with his consciousness and trying to kind of bond with him and communicate with him. So I had all these very kind of watercolory thoughts, and so anyhow, that record is a real, I love all the records. Some of them are, the high school quarterback, and other ones are the super nerdy kid that hated high school. But, the records all have different resonance for me.
Yeah. I've heard Todd Snyder say, like, when people ask him, like, do you get tired of people screaming out to play Beer Run? And he says, why would I get tired of it? I wrote it. Do you feel like that about songs? I've seen you live, and it's, people scream out. They're still screaming out for Satisfied. They're still screaming out for Muddy Jesus. Do you feel like that about the songs you've written? Are you cool with just playing them over and over again? Because some cats aren't. Some cats will be like,
no, I think me and Todd actually have a lot in common. I remember playing some shows with him a long time ago, and even though we have a different probably people may think of us differently. We kind of both have a very blue collar, but also very driven approach. I love playing Satisfied. As a matter of fact, it's one of my favorite songs to play. The issue I've ever had is people coming into a room and just being kind of rude about it. That's really the thing is like, and it's not, I mean, part of it sometimes would piss me off, but really the biggest thing was like, dude, you're ruining the vibe of the whole show. Like, there'd be a couple of people that for some reason thought they had the authority to tell the whole rest of the 400 whatever, however big many people are in this room, what should be happening in that night. And to me, and this, like when there's a great show, it's a communion, it's a collective consciousness. And I guess the only thing I've ever struggled with about that is just wanting them to chill out a little bit. So like, when I played that, because I'm playing a lot more of my older material right now, I'm playing a lot more electric guitar. I kind of came to it in my own weird way that it makes sense to me now, and I've got no issues with doing a set that has a lot of older material. And so when I play now, it feels that most of the people are really happy, and that's part of what I want. I really want to bring joy to the room. Maybe some of the people that are not, that maybe wanted to hear more of the later material, maybe they're more mellow about their belief system. I don't know, but I just want, I think that's the deal. It's like, ultimately, I don't want to be playing shows every night where half the crowd's disappointed. That's not enjoyable to me. If that were the case, I would just stay at home and make records.
Yeah. Around 2011, you put out El Sonido Nuevo. And that, I've heard you say that that's more of an underground album, but man, that album, it just fucking rocks, man. That same year, you released The First Third, which was the original album that became All the Colors. I'm going to repeat this, and please forgive me. As a fan, I used to hear rumblings that there's another album that was supposed to come out of the original versions. Did you just always have that in your bag and just waited to release it, or how did that happen? Did you re-record those albums or those songs?
No. So, well, that was first of all, I'm the worst about that kind of stuff. I'm a rambling, gambling, keep on moving kind of dude. And like, I totally forgot I even had it. It was like a good friend of mine in radio was like one of my super fans early on that really helped get kind of people on board. Because we had sent him, my manager, I think, had sent him maybe mixes of that record because we were really excited about that record. And it was a really cool experience, man. We recorded at Crystal, which is Sly Stone and Stevie Wonder's studio, and we recorded with this guy Matt Hyde, who's an old friend of mine and huge producer. I mean, more in a different scene, but like, just everybody was really excited. And like when we kind of hit the wall with Capricorn and they didn't dig it, I honestly was really surprised because I thought that after Modern Day Folklore, which was a little bit, I think, too edgy for Phil, it was a little too like kind of dark and, like Barline and even Train Tracks, even though it's real riffy and shit, it's they're pretty heavy songs. I mean, I thought that Phil was going to really relate to it because to me that record's so soulful. And I just think it was a little too Beatley for him. And this is what I'm talking about, dude. Like, people have the weirdest rules. Like, a lot of people in that kind of community, the Southeast kind of community, hate the Beatles. It's the weirdest thing. It's why like Big Star was such a failure, because Big Star kind of had this Beatley thing, kind of, not really, but and so when I released that record, I was totally surprised. And then when it didn't work, I just kind of kept going, I mean, I was bummed, I was disappointed, but I just kept going. And so, it's funny that El Sonido and The First Third came out around the same time because they're very, very, to me, very different records, almost like a different artist. When you really kind of put them as bookends, they sound pretty disparate.
Yeah, when I heard El Sonido, I thought to myself, Man, he here he goes reinventing himself again. I think it's completely different from anything you've ever done. You know?
Well, a big part of that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, just to go back to the statement of like, really take some time and go through like the Kinks catalog or something and really listen to how different the records are from record to record. I'm going to qualify, or I'm going to counter what you're saying in the general consensus and say we're in a lame time in culture in that way, because it wasn't reinvention once upon a time. It was your next record. The very nature of making another record was to, quote, reinvent yourself every record. Ultimately, there's not a record where my voice is fraudulent on a record. And that's one thing I feel very strongly about. I totally am 100% committed, and all those are very real parts of what I do. Like on El Sonido, what was really cool about that record was I had started collaborating with this guy, Matt Harris, who was in his band that I really liked a lot called Oranger out of San Francisco, kind of a psych rock band, because I've always been really into like a lot of the kind of British psych and a lot of there's things about that kind of music I really like. So when he and I started collaborating, he was like, we were just like two little kids. We were just so into all of the influences, and we would go off and read weird books and listen to this strange record and just totally trip out. And then we'd write a song. And so that's kind of what that record is about to me. So what I hear in the record and what I hear in all my records is I hear my friends and the musicians I was around, like on And All the Colors. It's like I just had started playing with George Reef and J.J. Johnson. Bucka was still playing with me. When I did Luminaria, I had a lot of my Seattle friends playing on that record, and Chris Dye had started playing with me, and Bucka and Rob Gerso and Brian Stanifer that plays with Alejandro played on that. And then each record is like this different group of family and friends.
Yeah, yeah. And to go back to, you mentioned JJ. I remember seeing a show when he was touring with you, and he did the beginning of Magdalena like a beatbox.
Oh yeah, 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 man.
I always thought that was pretty cool. I only saw you guys do that once, but
yeah. Well, that was such an interesting time because that was such an amazing band, and I remember it was the first band I really had after the Ian Moore band. And there was this weird, this was not just to me, this was happening with like Little Doyle and Charlie. All of us were stretching out and trying to make records that I think are really cool. I mean, I love Doyle's first record, and I love Charlie's record Under the Wishing Tree.
Yeah.
I think that they're really, it's weird, man. Like I said, I think we just hit a weird space and time. We all came in kind of the wake of Stevie Ray Vaughan's death, and whether good or whatever version of that it was, maybe that gave us some initial success, but it also put this weird ceiling on what people were willing to let us be.
Yeah.
And I saw all of my peers really kind of fighting. It was just a weird time where, that band, man, the And All the Colors band, and I don't mean again in any way a slight of the Ian Moore band, because that was a powerful juggernaut, Chris and Michael and Bucka, but that band was badass. My Colors era band was serious business, and I just remember playing, and not that people didn't dig it, I could tell people dug it, but there was just this weird resistance everywhere. And as I've grown older, what I've realized is you can't, this is something I tell kids all the time, you can't get strung out when there is that resistance, because it's kind of like a sine wave or like the tides of the sea. Sometimes the wave is moving up or the tides are moving up and the ships just all go out to sea, right?
Yeah.
Other times you can't do anything. You could make literally the greatest record of all time and people just aren't going to dig it.
Yeah.
They're just not ready, or you didn't do it at the right time. And, that's kind of the way I think of the kind of And All the Colors years. Which was a little frustrating at the time, but I'm really, really proud. And even the resistance that we felt at that time was part of making the art. I don't know that I would have made records like Luminaria and El Sonido if I hadn't realized that you don't have to retreat from resistance. Sometimes resistance is worth digging into.
Yeah, it's a good thing sometimes.
Yeah.
You mentioned Doyle and Charlie. I had this question, and I wasn't going to ask it, but I will. I know you did some work early in your career with Joe Ely. Around that time, like those cats have gone on to be sidemen for like Eric Clapton and Roger Waters. Were you ever approached, or did you ever consider doing something like that just to keep playing? I mean,
Yeah, but
to do something, just to not think about making your own music, just to go out and just play.
well, I did. I mean, I did. I mean, I took a gig not that long ago with Mraz for about a year because we were broke, and my friend Carlos was the MD. You know, I think one of the things, if I was going to criticize myself, is I'm just not a careerist. You know, I don't really look at things like, if you knew my dad, you would understand me. My dad was an idea guy, and I'm an idea guy, and I did, you know, like I had after modern, like about 96, I had an offer to audition for Don Henley with the idea that assuming I, could play decently, that I could get the gig. And I remember kind of going, I'd heard all these things about him that it maybe wasn't the right thing for me, and I didn't really want to do it. And I told my friend Peter Stroud about it, and it really helped. I think Peter's amazing, so he's been successful because he's amazing and cool. But I think it was one of his first bigger gigs that he got, and he's gone on to do that. You know, it's not that I'm resistant to it. It's just that the way that, so I just move around so much that I think people don't, like, a lot of people, here's something funny, Bernard. You're gonna crack up about this. I mean, I'm playing more guitar more now, but like when I moved up to the Northwest, I don't even think people knew that I knew how to play guitar. They probably thought I was just a folk singer, because my identity. I just, like, around that time, even though I was really poor and it was a hard time financially, I don't think I was ever more fired up about my career than around Luminaria, because it just felt important to me and it felt cool, and I like that energy. So that's the thing that was turning me on. And if I maybe was thinking about it more from a visibility and truly building a career at that point, I probably would have tried to take like a big gig, to keep my name in those areas. But that just wasn't how I was thinking,
Yeah.
and it's the I was talking to my wife about it. The other side of it too, is that I'm really good at being me. I'm not the best guitar player at like fitting into a million different styles. Like, if I play with somebody where my style fits well with what they do, then that's a good fit. But I'm not the guy that can transform and go from playing, with Zach Brown to playing with like Lady Gaga. I'm just not that guitar player.
Yeah. And I tell people, I'm always trying to turn people on to you, and like, have you heard this? And then there's cats who think about it and go, oh, I didn't know he was still making music. But you've been putting out not only albums but EPs consistently since you started.
Yeah, I'm going through a little bit of a thing. I mean, right now I had some pretty serious vocal issues that are super weird. Nothing like nodes or anything. So I've kind of been, I've written some songs. I've definitely got some stuff, but I've been focused. It's a trip, man. During the pandemic, I've been tripping out. I've been probably practicing guitar when I have the time, 6 to 8 hours a day, almost every day.
Wow.
And that takes a lot of time, man. And, I was thinking about it actually right before, it's so interesting now, I've spent so much time, really working on my vocals, really trying to be like a great singer and then a great guitar player, and trying to be a great songwriter. And those are all different paths, and the balance of those is really interesting, because when you're trying to be a great guitar player, it really is about repetition, and it really is about woodshedding, and it really is about taking in these pieces, because as an instrumentalist, even if you really desire to have your own voice, you kind of need to learn all these different architectures. As a songwriter, there's some of those elements, but it's much more about walking through the wilderness, and kind of like, I was kind of reflecting back on my career and going, there's been interesting times where I didn't, practice at all, but I probably learned more, but it was in a less linear fashion. Like, songwriting is living. You have to live to songwrite. I mean, it's good to read books and take in content and get better at your word usage and your melody usage, but really fundamentally, it's about like capturing life experience. And so if you're just sitting in a room by yourself, unless you're like a Sylvia Plath character, you're not going to really grow as a songwriter. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic that I try to balance. It's kind of hard because, you also want to go on a vibe. So if I'm really feeling the guitar, and I want to play it 6-8 hours a day for a few years, well, there you go. I'm going to work on that.
So I was going into that next. This last year during the pandemic, you also started these Zoom workshops.
Mm-hmm.
What is the response to those? Have they been pretty good?
Well, I actually started my workshops, my songwriting workshops in earnest about 7 or 8 years ago. And those were revelatory. As a matter of fact, maybe in my mind, the coolest thing that I've done because, like I said, I mean, everybody's different. Like I'm a musician, but what does that mean to be a musician? Everybody has a different thing that they need. I'm looking for communion. I'm looking for vulnerability. There's things about it that are really important to me that don't jive directly with having a quote music career. So when I started doing my songwriting workshops, and actually really, first of all, dissecting what I believe and going through songs that have really affected me and why they're so important. Man, that was so cool to do that. And then to share that with people and to see that really what it comes down to is energetically people loving themselves enough and then allowing themselves the space to create. That's something that's really important to me. And that's something that even in my music early on, I wanted to kind of communicate. So this is a more direct way to kind of do the same thing that I was trying to do from standing on stage, playing my songs. During the pandemic, it's been, actually, I did a real in-person workshop. I feel like that was a hat trick pulling that off in November. We got together like physically in a space and what I am trying to do as I get older is I'm trying to be a little bit more aware of my energy because the world's so big. And I like for instance, being home for this time, it's been really nice. I've been able to garden this year and I keep bees and spending time with my wife and, getting to know my kids as young men and, just basically having an experience that I've never experienced in my adult life, which is living as a normal human being. So I'm kind of digging that. And what I'm wanting to do as I move forward is, be smart with all this stuff and make sure that I'm doing things that are financially smart. So like I'm toying with the idea of creating different types of digital content that can live, for forever, in different ways that I can do that. So, and I started teaching guitar and songwriting during this time. And I realized like, oh man, that's amazing because, for me in the past, when a tour cycle fell apart, like if I had a tour that fell apart, I would be screwed. Like I had no income or no way to make income. And it was very stressful. So those are all really liberating things for me. And what I'm hoping to do when I jump back into my tour cycle, which come August it's like normal. It's pretty crazy and busy. I'm hoping to kind of have a little bit of a better balance because when I go on the road right now, I don't have a guitar tech and I don't have a tour manager. I'm teching for myself, loading gear, advancing shows, and it's you know how much work all that stuff is. It gets pretty tiring after a while. So if I'm out for a couple of weeks, it's kind of like touring for about 6 months in the old days in terms of energy. So yeah, just trying to find a good balance with all that moving forward, and then trying to think of like what my next record is going to be.
Yeah. You also have coming up over September and October some in-person songwriting workshops out near Wimberley.
Mm-hmm.
And how can people find out about that? Can they sign up for that?
Yeah, so I have on my ianmoore.com page, there is a Ian Moore Workshops page, and there is contact info on that. I'm doing it over 2 weekends. We actually, over the pandemic, did it a lot smaller. We had gotten pretty big where there were like 25 people, And we did it with 11 or 12 people and realized that it's actually a lot more intensive. So instead of doing one gigantic weekend, we're doing 2 smaller weekends this year. And one's in September, one's in October. It's basically 3 days. And what I've been trying to communicate to people is people are so shy about doing this stuff because they feel that they're going to drag their group down or they're not going to have enough skill sets. And it's weird because oftentimes those people show up and they're often the best songwriters in the group. And that's what's interesting about a group setting and why I like it is that everybody brings a different perspective, and really the only thing you need to bring is a willingness to be vulnerable and to try.
That kind of hits home with me because I'm scared to be either.
Well, that's not like I've got it figured out because I'm barely hanging in there half the time. So I'm not prescribing it like, hey man, I'm.
Yeah.
Living is to live is to be vulnerable, because to live is to love and to be loved and to see and to be seen, right?
Yeah.
And in order to feel all of those things, the only way to do it, and it fucking sucks sometimes, man. Being vulnerable is not like this awesome, like you get a ribbon and a cookie, it's you're out there slogging it away. And like, as an example, in my vocal rehab, one of the things that's been really, and you're going to probably crack up after listening to this, is I started realizing that I kind of hold my tongue too much. And it's maybe not in the way that you think. It's that, I talk a lot about philosophical ideas and this and that, but really ultimately, maybe it's because I've been a public figure my whole life, and I've tried to be diplomatic, dealing with other people's ignorance, like people being very judgmental about me. But it's really about, for me, speaking the truth and trying to say things even when it's maybe not going to benefit me, like you might really piss off. So I was talking to my therapist about that. I got a therapist through Sims, which, by the way, really important thing about mental health. Everybody's kind of screwed in the head a little bit. There's no one that. And anybody that thinks they're not probably needs help more than anybody else. So one of the things I've really been trying to work on, and I have a nonprofit up here that does this too, is normalizing therapy for people. And the fact, like, having somebody that's a professional to talk to about what's going on in your head, it can be very beneficial. Doesn't mean you're a loser or something. It's actually, so for me, it's been great. And when my therapist said, you kind of need to speak your truth, I kind of did what you did. I scoffed. I was like, Jesus, I think a lot of people would wish I would just shut up. And he goes, well, it's different between saying that and actually saying, something where it's really not going to help you. Right. So anyhow, I try that, and everywhere in my life, it's a disaster, everything. And I'm like, well, this is why I don't do it. But point is that that those behavioral patterns that we all have, they create these kind of little prisons, and you don't even know it, and then all of a sudden you're stuck. And for me, the ultimate way, like, I think I resisted it because I've always thought I was pretty self-aware. What's a way to get someone into therapy? Take away your voice. Well, you won't be able to sing until you can figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
So it's me, but in doing that, there have been a lot of other things that I've really woken up to. So
yeah. Well, going back to what you said, being vulnerable and trying, and then my response was I do neither. I lied. When the world shut down and touring just quit, like, I went into a really bad space and didn't know what I was going to do. And once I started this, like, I'm a person who's very private, so putting myself out there, I thought that was, in trying it, and it's actually worked out for me. It may not be as super successful, but man, I haven't been this happy like I have been in the last few months.
Oh, yeah. And wait. That's the thing. You just said successful, and especially in the this is the thing about, so what is success?
Exactly. Right.
To me, success is happiness, recognition from my peers, a good life balance. Man, I've lived in this world. I've had enough. I've done some really big shows. I've done, it's like I could get in the thing of like going, well, I'm playing this thing and so is playing this thing, or they're on, the radio more than I am, or this. And it ultimately, no matter where you end up with material success, there's someone doing better than you. And if you get in that kind of comparative ideology, you're going to be miserable your whole life because you'll never win. There will always be something you don't have. You're playing stadiums. Well, someone else is doing two stadiums in a row. You're playing two stadiums in a row. Well, someone else just played to 500,000 people at Hyde Park. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
For me, the thing, I'm really ambitious. I'm never going to give up. Like, I'm 52 years old. I'm still thinking like, I'm going to put out this next record. It's going to be the biggest record in the world and change the world. I'll always be that way. I'm a dreamer. But ultimately, for me, it's the fact that I have a music career. I can still go play my shows. People dig what I'm doing. I can still put records out. My kids know my name and love me. My wife hasn't left me. Those are all different things, man, that are different balances. And like, so, one of my biggest mentors is a guy named Terry Allen. I covered it, actually, a tune of his on Green Grass. And he's Buck Allen's dad. And I remember early on when I was probably about 25, as a matter of fact, it was me and Charlie Sexton and Will Sexton. We were all, and a bunch of other musicians. We were all there. And I remember all of us kind of like we were all in young relationships and hanging out with Terry and Joe Harvey and them telling us like, it's okay to hate your partner sometimes. You're going to get in fights. Things are going to fall apart. It's hard. It's hard to balance art and life, and especially music and touring in life. And, kind of having mentors to not just show me how to play guitar and sing, which I've been very fortunate with, but also how to live. So much of what I do, Bernard, when I'm like, and my music is a lineage of people. Like, I don't sound necessarily like the people, but like, if you listen to my stuff, and you go, wow, Ian has this weird fascination with like this kind of Tin Pan Alley stuff. I grew up with Willie my whole life as one of my biggest influences. Maybe my favorite record of all time might be Stardust. And, and not only was it like a musical thing, but watching how Willie lived and watching that Willie just tried to emanate love his whole life, even when he was young and kind of more rowdy. And he always built these communities. And so those influences, and Jeff Walker and Doug Somm, huge one, obviously, for me. So it's not just about like, how does Jimmy Vaughn play the guitar, or how did Paul Ray sing, or how did Townes Van Zandt fingerpick? It's also about, looking at the ways, like, how were their careers? How does it work? And, like Willie's just such a great example, well, for anybody, but especially for those of us that grew up in Central Texas, because he kind of created his own terms. He didn't, like a lot of the things that he did were like, there was no industry in Austin when he moved to Austin. There was nobody, there were no hippies making country when he started doing that, he kind of vibed with what he believed in. And, and so he's had a great career, and not just a great career because he's really famous, but a great career because Willie's very beloved. And I think that's the inspiration for a lot of us.
Yeah. Well, I've taken up enough of your time. I only have a couple of more questions. Ever since I've gone to see you, I tell everybody, like, you got to go see him live, because he's not just a great guitar player, a great singer, a great songwriter. He's a great storyteller. And I think that's why you called your label Hablador when you started it. But man, I've heard you tell the story a couple of times, and then you recently, I think, put it on your social media, and I hope you don't mind me asking you, but your story about Whole Foods and Craig Weller, and would you mind telling me that story again?
No, I feel like it's important. And the reason I actually my wife drives my wife crazy. Anytime I go into Whole Foods, I always tell the checkout person that story. And typically they're just like so annoyed, or they think I'm lying, or it's just like, geez, who's this dude that's whatever. But it's important to me because I believe in ideas, and I believe in motivation. I really believe in the integrity of an idea. And so when I was a kid, I had a very awesome early life. We lived in India, we lived in Mexico, we traveled all over the world. We were surrounded by these really great intellectual thinkers. It was very cool bohemian lifestyle. When I was about 7, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, and everything kind of fell apart. We went back to, we came back to Austin, and my mom started chemotherapy. And my mom was a very strong-willed, forward-thinking person, and she really, really believed in the power of organic food and holistic medicine and positive thinking and all of this stuff. And, here she is getting like chemicals radiated into her body. So that became a huge passion of hers. And my parents had this small friend group at the time. All the kind of counterculture people in Austin were friends because there were not that many of them back in those days. And so one of their best friends was this guy, Craig Weller, and Craig was a leather worker. And they would come over often, a couple of times a week, to have dinner. They were real close to us. And my mom would just proselytize about organic vegetables and this and that. And Craig got kind of fired up and decided to quit leatherworking and open a health food store. And my dad, who had some money at that point, my dad was an ethnographer, and he had a kind of basically a store. It's like a museum filled with old artifacts from Tibet and China and mostly Asian. So he had some money, and he gave Craig the loan to start Whole Foods. At the time, it was called Clarksville Natural Grocery. So it wasn't officially Whole Foods, but for anybody back in Austin back then, that was Whole Foods. They even started it basically 2 doors down in the same area. And the way it worked is we got to shop for free for some finite period of time, like 5 years or something. And my memory of that time that's really funny, which is often my brother and I, we always felt really weird. Our parents were, we grew up in West Austin, but our parents, like my mom, never wore a bra. She had toe rings. My dad had long hair. He was super intellectual. All the other, this is Austin, very fratty kind of, very white kind of fratty. My dad's Jewish. My dad's a Buddhist scholar. We took a lot of collateral damage as kids. I got called faggot so many times. I should have probably put that in my name. But it was just a really interesting thing, and it's funny how Whole Foods has now become accepted by the very culture, an evolution of the very culture that hated it, and just the nature of how things are assimilated into mainstream culture. And that, I guess that's the thing I feel very strongly about is I love the idea and the integrity of the idea. As Whole Foods grew, the integrity of the ideas were compromised over and over and over and over again. And that's part of that seems almost inevitable as you grow in power. It's hard to keep the integrity of the idea because all of a sudden the money people come in, they have different value systems. And so one of the things I think about all the time is how to preserve the integrity of the idea, because to me, that is the fundament of what it's all about.
Yeah, I'll just finish up here real quick and let you go. The name of the podcast is Breakfast Included? And if breakfast was included, Ian, what would you have?
Oh man, you know what I would have if you know me at all. Did you see my I was just in Salt Lake City. Did you see my post about that?
No, I didn't.
Oh man. So I was down there. I get an Airbnb, and I was kind of moving kind of quickly. It didn't look close enough. Turns out there's no kitchen. So I'm down there for a week. I love to cook. Cooking is definitely one of my main things that I like to do. I mean, tends to go. A lot of musicians like to cook, I think. So anyhow, I'm a Texas boy, right? You're from San Antonio, right? Yeah. So you're.
Actually, I'm from Corsicana.
Oh no way. Okay. Okay. Growing up in Austin, and growing up, and then, I never cooked Mexican food when I lived in Texas, because why would you, right? It's so good. And then I moved up here, and it's, great Indian food, great Chinese food, Korean, a lot of the Asian, great seafood, great farm to table. terrible Mexican food. So all of this stuff, like my mom had been friends with Diane Kennedy. I was always around a lot of people. David Garrido from what is it, La Fonda San Miguel.
Mm-hmm.
Good friends with my family. So, man, I got so into it. And like when I was in Salt Lake City, I literally borrowed a crock pot and a hot pot because I had to make. I had like I'll eat this right after we're done with the podcast. I have some beans I made the other night, so I'll just if I'm in a hurry, I'll just make breakfast tacos and make some eggs, and I make this salsa called salsa doña, which is a creamy green salsa that's different from like a salsa verde.
Uh-huh.
It's mostly boiled jalapenos, and so like my perfect breakfast would either be huevos mexicana or migas, depending on whether I could deal with the cheese or not, and salsa doña, and here's the other thing too, man, because I'm from Texas, flour tortillas.
I know, right?
I love corn tortillas, but it's something I'm real defensive about. Like everybody's like, oh, flour's not authentic. And I'm like, man, you're thinking way too linear in your brain. Like you don't know anything about Texas and the history. And I've become a real, like, do you know Rob Walsh, the food critic?
No, I'm not familiar with him.
Dude, check out his books. They're so cool. If you're from Texas, like he has this one thing that's a Tex-Mex cookbook. And so one of the things that's become a big passion of mine is to reclaim the name Tex-Mex and get it away from kind of like the cheesy kind of gringo vibe and back to the fact that it's mostly like Chicano people making food in Texas with the ingredients they have. So beef, tortillas, flour tortillas. The stuff's changed a little bit, but it's just so good and so soulful. And to me, it reminds me of home.
Yeah, my parents owned a Mexican restaurant all my life, so.
Oh, no way! Oh,
so
that's awesome.
I'm very picky about my Mexican food, but I mean, there's good Mexican food everywhere. There's some places that it's not, but
That's so funny. My drummer Michael was the same way. His parents owned a tortilla factory.
Did they?
The big yeah, and so he was the same way. Like he and then they owned still own El Mercado, which is which is down there in South First. As a matter of fact, that's where the band started, in the shed right next to El Mercado.
Really?
He's the same way, man. He would like anything but Mexican food. Anything. Like he would eat, because he just had so much growing up.
I tell this story. The first time I went and spent the night at a friend of mine's house, his mom made us bologna sandwiches, and I went home the next day and I was telling my mom, like, oh my God, it was so good. I think it's called bologna, but we had eaten all we ate at home, Mexican food for breakfast. Go to the restaurant after school and you eat Mexican food. Then you go home and eat Mexican food and anything but Mexican food. But then in my late 30s, I started craving it again.
Oh, I mean, I don't know. Like I just love soul food. And like one of the things, like I like to get soul food from every culture. So I make like I'll make one of my favorite meals is like parpadelli ragu, which to me is Italian soul food. It's just big noodles with kind of a meat kind of gravy, basically, that you slow cook over a long period of time. Or that if I'm making like I love making Vietnamese food, I'll make pho, or I'll make the bún dishes, because same deal. They're just and honestly, like if you were to look again, like I said, when you mentioned Todd Snyder, like to me, I like music that's I don't like music that's necessarily fancy. Like I love blues music. I love folk music. I love things that aren't necessarily I don't know how to explain it, but it's the same way with food. Like if you really get into food, there will always be these chefs that are super fancy and everybody idolizes them. But most of my favorite food would be like a carniceria or like a Vietnamese place or like just cool soul, because that stuff has been refined for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Yeah. I agree.
Whereas new chefs are like, they went to this great cooking school in France, and, not that there's not traditions that they're basing it off, but I don't know, man, that food is just it just hits this like note in my soul. And it's the same thing that music does. Like right before this podcast, I got out to my studio and I'm huge Richard Thompson fan. I've been really working on my finger picking over the last couple of weeks because I've been deep on this jazz trip. And man, I just spent like 5 hours before this podcast trying to get my fingers to do this stuff. And then it's so funny because 99% of the people that are guitar fans don't even care about any of this stuff. They don't even know how hard it is. And I spent more time doing this, like it's hard. I'm still like can barely do it. It's a rich can do stuff, on a bad day that I would consider the greatest day of my life.
Yeah, when I was I worked for Jason Isbell for a minute, and Richard opened a string of shows for us, and watching him every night, I would think like, God, he's still blowing people away.
Yeah, there's just nothing like, what's been really interesting about really kind of digging. He's been one of my bigger influences. And even though, again, our playing sounds very different, his way of playing, that kind of like, I call it the edge of the wire style.
Yeah.
I love that style where you're kind of like, as opposed to like, obviously I love Stevie Ray Vaughan. He's a brilliant guitar player. He played a very a defined, it's kind of hard to explain because he is one of the greatest guitar players ever, but he didn't deviate much. Like if you saw him play Night to Night, his style was consistent. Like he pretty much played the same things, which is why his vibrato and his phrasing were so powerful. And that's really cool. I love that. But I really love this style. Like also Hendrix. Hendrix made everything up all the time. He never, ever, ever repeated anything. And Richard Thompson, even when he plays something like Vincent Black Lightning, which is obviously super fast stylistically, it still changes from night to night. It's crazy. Yeah. And that style of playing is very, very difficult it's hard to try to play that way because you can't just learn the thing. You could I've been like, a lot of what Richard plays is not technically that hard. It's his brain that's hard. It's like, wow, he did that there. And how do you even do that?
Yeah. Well, man, where can people find you on social media? Do you have Instagram and all that jazz or?
Yes, I do. My Instagram is Ian Moore Official. And I think my Facebook is too. And my Twitter, which I pretty much just send content out. I unfortunately don't monitor that a lot, but that's Go Ian. And then website's ianmoore.com. Like I said, I'm going to try to put And All the Colors out here in the next couple of weeks. So hopefully that will be up on streaming media, and I'm playing a bunch of shows. My birthday shows are coming up. Playing 3 shows in Central Texas the second week in August. I think it's like the 10th through the 12th maybe. And then I'll be out in California in September and October, the Midwest in September, and then I do my yearly Christmas tour, which is my acoustic tour, and typically the only acoustic stuff I do right now. That will be in December.
All right on, man. Yeah. Well, before I let you go, I just want to say one thing. When I was coming up in the 90s, when you were coming up, like being from where I'm from, Corsicana, a very small town, like you were like a rock star to me. And every time I met you, you were very human to me. You were very kind, not just to me, to all the fans who were bothering you after the show when you're trying to relax. But every time I've run across you since then, you've been consistently just nice. And when I started in this business, I'm just a tech. And the guys I work for, they're somewhat big bands. So when fans come up to me and they ask me for a pick, or they run to the stage and ask for a set list, I always think about you and a couple of other people I've crossed paths with in my life. I always think about the way you treated me, because I'm still a fan. So I look at them like they're me. So I just want to thank you for that and not being a dick to me then, because I think it would have jaded me going like, this guy's a dick. I'm going to be a dick when I do something, but
really, thank you. Honestly, like I said, for me, my goals, I played stadiums. I've been on the radio. Some people, like I said, my goals honestly are like, I want to be cool. I want to be a person that brings joy to people, whether it's through my music or through my interactions. I I like talking to people after the shows, even when I'm tired. I like it because I remember that feeling, and I still know what it feels like. I remember being the kid at the show, meeting the person, and so it's cool to hear that validated, that is being, for the most part, communicated to other people, because it's like the more people that act like this, the more I think it makes other people see that they could do it, and they can do it in their own life and their own music, and that it's not this, you know what I mean? It's not this, like, it's hard to do it. I've been teaching people guitar lessons during this time, and ultimately what it comes down to pretty much is like, hey man, do you want to do the work? Because it's a lot of work. But
Yeah.
the other side of it is that when you meet people and they're human, that happened with me when I played with the Stones, and I hung out with Keith Richards, and man, he made me feel like I was Keith Richards and he was me. He was so cool and just mellow, and I've had that experience with a lot of people, and I think even when I meet someone who's an asshole to me or to someone else, I almost kind of feel bad for them, because nobody wants to be that way, and it's almost like they're carrying a burden and they just need to let it go, because that's what stops people from being cool. They're stuck in resentment, or they're too cynical, or they just can't get out of their own way. So awesome. That's a great way to end it. Thank you for telling me that.
No, thank you. And thank you for doing this, man. I look forward to seeing you when you come through town again. And
Cool. Yeah,
have a great day.
Holler at me if you're coming through with somebody, whether through Seattle or Austin, because if I'm around, I'll come out. It'd be cool to hang.
Yeah, for sure, man. I'll definitely do that.
Right on. Take care, Bernard.
Hey, take care, man. Right on. That was Ian Moore. I don't know about you, but that was really cool for me. You can find him at Ian Moore Band Official on Instagram, find him on Facebook, or visit his website at ianmoore.com. Check him out, man. Go back and check out his catalog. I promise you won't be disappointed. Keep an eye out for his shows coming up. And if you're interested, visit his website and sign up for one of his songwriting workshops. I'm thinking about it myself. All right. I'm done for today. Have a great day, guys, and we'll talk to you next week.